Hey everybody, my name is Eric and this is Blessed and Bookmark. Welcome back to my channel. I'm really happy to have you here for our Q&A, which I post every Monday at 8. And here I'm going to be answering two questions. So let's jump right into it with the first one. And it's a tough one. It's a really interesting question. And the question is, if there is no sin in heaven, how did Satan sin? So again, super interesting question. And unfortunately, there's no place in the Bible where I can point to and be like, here is the definitive answer. Here's the verse that's going to answer this question. In fact, the details around Satan's rebellion, or failed rebellion, I should add, against God are sparse in the Bible. There's not a lot of passages that give us details about where or even when it happened. There's a lot of debate about when it happened. But the fact is that Satan did rebel against God and failed in that rebellion. However, your question is about him being able to sin in heaven. So that's something that I do want to address. To that, I have to give you some maybes instead of some definitelys, because some of this is going to be conjecture or kind of speculation a little bit. I'm going to look at two really famous passages that talk about the fall of Satan. But just to kind of give you some background information, these are passages that are doing double work. So not only are they giving us information about Satan's fall, but the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel, were referring to kings and rulers of their time that were being judged by God because of their rebellion as well. So there's kind of double work here, and I think that might add to how we should be interpreting these passages. So let's take a look at the first one. This is Isaiah, and he says this: "How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north, and I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." So we get a lot of like motivation here, right? The main thing that drove Satan's rebellion was his pride in wanting to be like God, to set his throne up aside from God. Okay, so the question though, right, we get a lot of information here. Like it says, you are fallen from heaven. And it also says that he will ascend to heaven. And I think this is a really interesting point. But the question here is the language being used in this metaphorical or not? Like, did Satan actually ascend to heaven? Because if he's saying, I will ascend to heaven, then that means that he was currently not in heaven when he plotted this. And then your question, there wouldn't be no objection, because if Satan did in fact sin when he was not in heaven, then there was no sin in heaven. I don't know if that makes sense, right? However, we can take this to be metaphorical. Maybe heaven here, when he's saying he will ascend to heaven, all this like upward language, setting above the stars, setting my throne on high, sit on the mount, far reaches of the north. There's a lot of upward directional language here. So maybe it just means like he's puffing up his pride, right? So maybe it could be metaphorical, so that kind of complicates things. But if we take this to be kind of literal, we can say that maybe Satan wasn't in heaven, because he said he will ascend to heaven, and then he did ascend to heaven, rebelled against God, and then was cast out from heaven. He was cast down from heaven after having ascended. Okay, so maybe that's one possibility. If we look at Ezekiel, he says it's the same thing. Ezekiel is specifically addressing the king of Tyre, but simultaneously the Bible is condemning Satan, who is the power behind the king of Tyre. Okay, so it says, "You were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty." So just for context here, it doesn't seem like Satan has fallen, right? "You were in Eden, the garden of God." So that's interesting, right? Satan was in the Garden of Eden prior to his fall. "Every precious stone was your covering." And then we get a list of them, right? "And on the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God." And this phrase right here, if you look at the footnote, it actually says that the meaning of the Hebrew phrase is uncertain. So this is a difficult passage here, because what does this mean that God placed him? I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. Is this heaven, or is this a holy mountain of God that's here on earth? Oftentimes, Mount Sinai, right, is referred to as the holy mountain of God. So maybe he was here on earth, right? Prior to his fall, this is what it seems like, right? Doesn't talk about his fall. Yeah, maybe Satan was here on earth prior to his fall. This is where he conceived sin in his heart, decided that he would rise up to the heavens, and then was cast down from them, right? It says, "You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till unrighteousness was found in you. In the abundance of your trade, you were filled with violence in your midst, and you sinned. So I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God." Okay, so maybe this for me kind of further complicates the issue, because had it not been for this phrase, it says he was on the holy mountain of God and he was cast from the holy mountain of God. So maybe the holy mountain of God is heaven. Maybe it is metaphorical. There's a lot of maybes here. So I'm not gonna come down definitively on this and say yes or no. He did sin in heaven. He was in the Garden of Eden. I don't know if should we take that metaphorical. Does Eden here represent kind of like perfection or paradise? Does the mountain of God kind of metaphorically represent heaven? There is a lot of maybes. So here is my conclusion for this, and hopefully you feel satisfied with this answer. Either of these interpretations could lead us to two conclusions. If Satan were somewhere else when he plotted against God, like Eden or the mountain of God, and then he ascended into heaven to rebel against God, and then was cast down from heaven in his failed rebellion, then there's no issue, right? Because your problem was like, how does he sin in heaven? But if we're only using metaphorical language here, and he was actually in heaven, if the mountain of God and Eden and all that kind of stuff represent heaven, I still don't think that there's an issue. And it's because of this reason. Even after the fall, Satan still had access to heaven. Clearly, after his fall, Satan still goes up into heaven. So, let's hear, right? We're in the book of Job, chapter 1. And it says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord," so they're in heaven, "and Satan also came among them." So Satan has access to heaven. There's another passage in scripture where he is accusing the high priest Joshua of his sins in heaven before God. So Satan still had access to heaven prior to the fall. So even if he did conceive sin in his heart while he was in heaven, I don't see that as a problem, because he still has access to heaven after his fall. So then that leads to even further complications. We have this idea of heaven being this perfect, sinless place. But I don't want anyone to misinterpret what I'm going to say here, but maybe characterizing heaven as perfect isn't the right word. Maybe perfection is something that is solely limited to God and God alone. Maybe like God's initial creation, maybe heaven is a very, very good place. When God created the world prior to the fall, he looked at it and he called it very good, right? Very good is not the same as perfection. So he called it very good, and maybe heaven is a very good place that will eventually, like the earth, be made perfect, right? In the new heavens and the new earth. Maybe when the new coming age, that's where perfection will fill heaven, right? So because of that, maybe say that's why Satan can access heaven still. If that's the case, I don't see an issue with sin entering Satan's heart, even if it was in heaven, because he is shown in scripture to have access to heaven even after his fall. What I do know is that he will be permanently cast out of God's creation, right? If we look in the book of Revelation, I'm not sure if yes. So in the book of Revelation, it says this: "Now a war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, and the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of Christ has come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. God is so good. I love reading this, right? But here we see that there will come a time, this is in Revelation, where Satan will be cast out of heaven completely, right? And there will be no place for him in heaven. So this is clearly after the events that we've read, because there seemed to be a place for him to be able to go and have access to heaven, right? Some people argue about the timing of this verse, and that's a whole nother issue, but just to kind of put it in there so you know, some people think that this happened when Jesus died on the cross, that Satan was cast out of heaven when Jesus died because he can no longer accuse believers. Some people think that this is a future eschatological event that's going to happen in Jesus' second coming, that Satan will be cast out of heaven permanently. But that will happen. Okay, so maybe that is when heaven reaches its like perfection. I'm not sure. But I do know that God's creation will see renewal, and that comes with when the entire cosmos recognizes the rule of God and submits to his will and lordship, and the redemptive plan finds its conclusion, and then everything will have perfection then. And so I hope that answers your question. I know that was really complicated, and I didn't want to overcomplicate it, but I also wanted to show you the different sides to it. So, just a quick recap, right? I guess this is what I'm saying, right? If say, perhaps Satan plotted against God while he was on earth, right? While he was in Eden or the mountain of God, and then ascended into heaven and then was casted down, or if it is metaphorical and he was in heaven when this happened, the Bible kind of gives us evidence that heaven may not be a perfect place. It is a very, very, very good place that transcends the place that we live in now, that will be perfected eventually. Okay, so again, hope that answers your question. The next question is a very long question, but it is a much easier one to answer, so I'm grateful for that. It says, in the beginning, did God have any intention of Adam and Eve repopulating before they sinned? Since there was a Garden of Eden 2.0 after Jesus returns, will we be able to procreate, or will it be just be those who were saved living there? Okay, so did God have a plan for Adam and Eve to procreate prior to the fall? And luckily, this is a very, very, very easy yes. Okay, so let me take you to the Bible. Let's just go straight there. And here we are in Genesis, and Genesis 1:28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on earth. So right from their creation, God told Adam and Eve to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. This might be conjecture or a speculation, but this is why I don't think that Adam and Eve were in the garden for a long period of time prior to the fall, because they would have conceived, because God gave them the order to, right? So I know from my studies, I've studied a lot of literature, and there's a very famous epic poem by John Milton called Paradise Lost, and he goes out of his way. He was a Puritan, and a lot of Puritans held these kind of negative stigmas about things like sex, and he goes out of his way to write a scene in the poem of Paradise Lost where Adam and Eve have this very like holy, blissful moment where they consummate their marriage, and it's like all nature is rejoicing because this is a beautiful holy act. And afterward, after the fall, there's another scene where it's the opposite of that. So Milton was arguing that sex is not this really negative thing that people should be ashamed of, as long as it's done within the parameters that God has established. So God did establish for Adam and Eve to be fruitful and to multiply prior to the fall. After Jesus comes and after we get to Eden 2.0, as you call it, the new creation, we will also not procreate. It's a very easy answer. The Bible talks about this as well, so let me take you there. This is in Matthew, and amid questions the Sadducees were asking about the resurrection. That's the title that the translator has put here, but it's important to know that they did not believe in the resurrection. They were just using this question to kind of trap Jesus in a theological kind of trap. But Jesus says this. So just definitively, he says, for in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. So in the resurrection, right, in the final resurrection, new creation, people would not be married and people would not be given in marriage. Okay, so nobody will be having sex or procreating. So, and that's important because you know, it, a lot of people think of, I mean, I know some religions that that's part of the paradise package, right? But this isn't some defect in God's plan for eternity with us, right? It is because marriage and all that entails has always pointed to our future union with God. And in the new creation, there is no necessity for the picture when we have reality, right? So we don't need types and shadows and figures to point to the thing that we actually have. Besides that, all of our desires will be completely met in our union with Christ, and there won't be any need to go and try to find fulfillment in anyone else, because we will be fulfilled in God and in God alone. So hope that answered your question. And I hope I spoke with clarity. And yeah, that's it. So those are the only two questions that I am answering today. If you have any questions that you would like for me to address or talk about, leave them in the comments down below. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. I'm having a great time with you guys, and I can't wait to see what God is going to do. I hope his word gets out there to as many people as possible, and you can be a part of that just by hitting like, sharing the video with somebody that might be interested in the topic. So that's it. So I will see you in the next video, and thanks for stopping by.